Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, joined by Rob Dunham.
Hi, everybody.
All right, we're recording later in the weekend than we normally do because schedules are what they are and stuff happens, and that's life. So you will get this podcast after the weekend, but that's okay. We are going to, of course, have a great show. No matter when it comes out, it's going to be awesome.
For the people.
For the people. Yeah. We will talk about the box office, but we'll, of course, talk about the box office from last weekend. Some of the other stuff may trickle in. Who knows? We will talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. We'll talk about Oppenheimer, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion about the highest grossing movies of all time, including at least one that we were both like super surprised about. And of course,
some of the movies on this movie are gross.
Oh gosh, we're already starting on that. And of course, we'll have our watch list if you hang around for Rob's jokes long enough to get to the watch list part of the podcast.
I commend you if you do.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, let's jump straight into the box office, and this is for the previous weekend, the weekend that was the June 4th weekend. And so Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse in its debut week did $120 million. So very good number. It is up over 200 million now. The Little Mermaid in its second week did $41.3 million. So that's a 56 percentage point drop, which is on the higher end of average, I would say, on that. The Boogeyman, 12.3, came in number 3, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Guardians of the Galaxy in week number 5 did $10 million. And Fast X in weeks number 3 did $9.5 million. That movie has totaled $128 million. Guardians of the Galaxy, meanwhile, is at 323, and The Little Mermaid at 186 as of last weekend. Rob, what stands out to you from the box office numbers?
So Across the Spider-Verse, I think, is pretty impressive considering the first Spider-Verse movie only did, I believe it was 35.8, if I read that correctly in an article somewhere. This one did significantly more than the first one did. I think part of that is down to the fact that when the first one came out, people really didn't know what to expect. Like, they didn't know what this was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that having seen the first movie, even though the second movie has different directors, the visionaries behind it, Miller and Lord, are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So people knew like what kind of movie they were going to be seeing. And I think people really latched on to the first one after they found out what it was. So I think there was an audience generated from that. I don't know if they knew it was going to be this big, but I was really happy to see it succeed because I think it's getting in a lot of ways, it's getting the initial success the first one should have had.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about this in the watch list, right? You saw it too, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I actually saw it twice.
Nice.
I saw it and then I went and saw it with my son because I wanted to see it again and wanted him to see it.
Sweet. Yeah, I basically agree with what you're saying. Like, it found an audience. It wasn't 100% sure what the audience would be for the first one, but the first one was so well done that I am not surprised that it did a big number. I have to kind of ask this question based on this. Is Spider-Man the most bankable of any of the superhero movies, of the superhero properties, of any of them, Marvel, DC, any of them? Is Spider-Man now the most bankable?
Well, we've seen Spider-Man succeed no matter who Spider-Man is. So there's something about that character that people just really... I think he is the most... I mean, you could argue like Batman, Superman, but Definitely Batman. You could argue for, but DC have just mismanaged Batman so poorly. They've managed him so poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that Spider-Man might be the dominant superhero. And I mean, we look around at kids, like at least in my um, circles, there are way more kids interested in pretending to be Spider-Man than pretending to be Batman or Superman.
Well, especially because the way DC has gone darker, um, Batman is not a kid's property anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not. It's not a character for kids any longer. Uh, so that, I mean, that certainly is a factor. I would also say that I would put at least more than a little bit of the success of Spider-Man into the realm of how well Sony has done managing that property, because Sony still has some of the rights to this. And so therefore there is a it's not a direct Marvel thing. Now Marvel movies have done very, very well, but I think Sony has put a lot of excellent energy into these movies and into this property in ways that we haven't always seen, especially on the DC side, but even lately with Phase 4 of Marvel, it seems like Spider-Man has an almost an immunity to what's happening in Phase 4 of Marvel.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I'll talk about that later too with the top 15 movies of all time.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
But yeah, the other thing about the box office, and I think, I'm a direct, like I ended up seeing both of them, but I really think that a lot of the audience for Boogeyman might have actually gone to see Spider-Man instead,
I,
probably with their kids.
I think you're right.
'Cause I was very, very surprised at how low the number was for Boogeyman.
Yeah.
I was expecting easily in the 20 to 30s, and it only did 12.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think I think there is kind of a set pool that you can draw from when it comes to the box office.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that Spider-Man probably drew a lot of people who would have gone to see the Boogeyman if Spider-Man had not come out the same weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, you might be right. It'll be interesting to watch what happens with the Boogeyman's gross for the next week or so. What the final numbers come out for this weekend here, as to see where it ended up with, and to see if there was much of a drop off. Because if we're correct that everyone who wanted to see both went to Spider-Man, then we would expect to potentially not see much of a drop for Boogeyman in week two. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that, because I think you're right. I was a little surprised to see how low that number was, especially because, like we've talked about, the built-in audience for horror, the fact that it's a Stephen King, the fact that it's like kind of a well-known character. um yeah, it's a little bit of a surprise. um Anything else?
Not from the box office now.
Okay. So we have two movies opening this weekend, and the first one is Transformers Rise of the Beasts. And this one stars Anthony Ramos, uh, Dominique Fishback, Luna Lauren Velez, and Dean Scott Vasquez. And this movie takes place during the 1990s. A new faction of Transformers, the Maximals, join the Autobots as allies in the battle for Earth. So we have a little bit of a prequel to the Transformer series here. Got the action movie genre going on here. And the second movie that came out is called Mending the Line. And this stars Brian Cox and Perry Matfield. And Patricia Heaton is in this one as well. And this is a Marine wounded in Afghanistan is sent to a VA facility in Montana, where he meets a Vietnam vet who teaches him how to fly fish as a way of dealing with his emotional and physical trauma. So you have kind of a character driven story and an action movie. Thoughts on any of those?
I think these are both movies that I'm not interested in opposite directions. One, because I don't really want to go see a super serious movie, about two veterans learning to fly fish, and two because I have like zero interest left in Transformers
Oh, I know.
after what I've do with the movies, and the trailers for this did not make me rethink that at all.
When did you jump off the Transformers bandwagon?
Probably after about the second one.
Mhm. The
I mean, I
second
actually
one,
really liked the first.
the second
I
one
really
was
liked the
one of
first.
yeah, the first one was really good. Yeah, I agree. The first one was excellent. The second one was one of the worst action movies I've ever seen in my life. And I like action movies. That ending was like the ending action sequence was the most pointless half-hour battle I've ever seen. It was a dumpster fire of a movie. Now the third one was better, but and I did go see the third one, but after that I was like, I just have no desire to see any of these things anymore. And I don't think I've seen one since.
Yeah, I
So
mean, there were elements of the story that were okay, and probably all of them, but the action is so disjointed and hard to follow. Especially when you've got two full armies of these things fighting against each other.
yeah.
It was really unclear at times who exactly you were supposed to be hoping would win, and
Mm-hmm.
that makes an action movie kind of confusing. Um, I will say that the Bumblebee movie that came out with John Cena is actually pretty good
Mm-hmm.
as a standalone movie. Um, but that was a lot more focused on just the one
Mm-hmm.
character, and I think that was so good because it was really focused on telling a story, as opposed to, especially the newer Transformers group movies, have kind of felt like they were just trying to give you something pretty to look at.
Yeah.
Um, which might sell toys, but doesn't really interest me as far as movie goes.
Yeah, they've just been so poorly done on a number of levels. I mean, I'm sure they're visually interesting, but they're not well written. They're not well done. And even the action doesn't seem to deliver what it's supposed to be delivering. I am also not particularly interested in mending the line. I would probably see it if I had to, you know, and could probably I mean it's probably a well done character story. Just not particularly interested in the moment. I'm not a fly fishing guy. I'm not a fishing guy. I don't understand fishing. I really don't. I think
Yeah,
fishing is
I
over.
retired from fishing at the age of 12 when I hooked my thumb twice in one day, and I said that day I'm never fishing again, and I have not picked up a fishing pole since that day.
My
Almost
dad took
30,
me. Good.
that
Yeah.
was almost 30 years ago now.
Yeah, my dad took me a couple times when we were younger, I think just to kind of expose us to it. Hey, this is fishing. And I'm just like, I just want to play in the creek. I don't have to sit here and hold this pole. Like, why do I have to hold this pole?
Right.
Like, and I don't eat fish, so it's like, like there's just no appeal to fishing for me. I don't.
Yeah, less fishing and more boring for me, really.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, well, that is the box office for this week. And now let's move on to a couple of different newsworthy items here. And the first one is if you went to see Spider Man, you may have come across some issues, mainly with the sound. Um, there apparently were some odd sound mixing things. They were having trouble hearing dialogue over music, particularly in Gwen Stacy's opening sequence. The issue was uh, so widespread across the country as they were doing this. They actually made stickers for the projectionists, telling them about what levels to put things are. And here's where what the stickers said: I play Spider Verse at full volume because I'm awesome. And the movie mix is really dynamic. This is a quote: the movie mix is really dynamic and comfortable at full volume. In a full house, it might even be better at 7.5. um, and it appears like the complaints have been heard, and they have actually issuing updates to the film for all the theaters in order to try and correct some of those issues. Uh, how does this happen? And did you
I don't know,
experience
but
it?
I did not experience it the first time I saw it. But then the second time I saw it, it was really, really quiet. And I was like, this movie is a lot quieter than the first time I saw it. And I think maybe they were overreacting
Mm,
maybe to a complaint about it, because it was hard to hear like anything in the opening sequence because everything was so turned down. And I was wondering why that was. Now maybe it's because it was a reaction to this going on.
mhm.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. Apparently, it's not a ton of theaters, but I did when I saw it. I was in the theater and I was thinking like, it sounds like they don't even have like the full surround sound on right now. And I was sitting there wondering the whole time, like, it doesn't seem like the surround sound is on. Something's going on. So I think they messed with. I think they by the time I got to, because I didn't go see it the first day. I was like a couple days later. Um, I think they messed with the audio makeup and mix trying to compensate for it by the time I got there. Uh,
Hmm.
so it felt like I was watching the movie without the side speakers on. It was very strange. I almost thought about going to say something about it because sometimes theaters don't flip switches or whatever to switch
Mm-hmm.
over things, and so I thought maybe that happened, but yeah, so I did notice that there was something odd, but I think that was more the theater trying to compensate for what they'd heard previously. But it should be fixed now. So if that's not a reason to go out and see it again, I don't know what is.
Maybe I need to see the third time just to make sure it's fixed.
Yeah. All right, so that's just a little interesting story that comes out. Speaking of someone who's been criticized for audio issues, Christopher Nolan. Uh, there is some more details on Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer will be Nolan's first R-rated film in 20 years since Insomnia in 2002, which is one he didn't actually write. He directed it, but he didn't write it. So, first R-rated film. It's really, really interesting. He is stuck with the PG-13, and it's interesting that you're going to see this rated R. I'm curious. Also, this is set to be the longest. Oppenheimer is going to be the longest film in Nolan's career, clocking in just shy of 3 hours. Interesting. So, what do you make of Oppenheimer getting an R rating and being almost 3 hours?
I mean, there's no doubt he can make an R-rated movie if you watch Memento.
Sure.
Um, pretty clear that he can still direct that kind of movie,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just been a long time since he has.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it's like PG-13 with just like a couple things that they were like, well, we can't have that in the movie and have it still be rated PG-13.
Yeah.
And he was so committed to it, he just said, all right, we'll get an R rating anyway. I guess this one makes more sense to not push back against getting that rating, considering the material, what he's making the movie about. It's not like a Batman movie,
Mm-hmm.
or a science fiction movie where he's trying to maybe draw more like teen kids and stuff into it. This is definitely more of a movie geared towards the adult audience.
For sure.
So I'm guessing that he probably didn't have a whole lot of pushback against this. And if we know anything about Christopher Nolan, it's that if he has a vision and he wants his vision to be shown in a certain way, he's gonna do whatever it takes to make sure that happens.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing if our rating was what it took to make it happen, he was not gonna budge from including whatever it was that ended up getting to that place.
Yeah. I'm more interested in the fact that it's almost 3 hours. This is continuing to go along with the trend that we've seen about movies being longer and longer and longer. We've talked about it a couple times in the podcast about how so many movies are clocking in at like 2 hours and 35 minutes, 2 hours, 45 minutes, 2 hours, 55 minutes. It's amazing how many movies are coming in closer and closer to 3 hours. I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. Of course, I trust Christopher Nolan to actually do it for a reason as opposed to half of these other movies that are that long. Like John Wick does not need to be 2 hours and 45 minutes. Just saying. Um, but I trust that Nolan is going to deliver a film that you're going to want to sit through for 3 hours. I'm not super concerned for that. It will be interesting. Going off of this, it comes out July 21st. Um, what will be interesting is that is 1 week after Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, and the same day as Greta Gerwig's Barbie movie. So
Yeah, I saw that.
I'm imagining, I mean, it's an interesting mix of films all coming out kind of in the exact same time frame. I would have thought Oppenheimer would have wanted to have that they would have wanted to have a more exclusive window than they do. However, I don't know that there's a lot of crossover audience between Oppenheimer and Barbie. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I'm thinking. Um, Another fascinating thing about this, I don't know if you saw this, but um, it will be one of the first movies to use black and white IMAX film. And uh, only about 20 theaters in the entire country are going to be showing the full 70 millimeter IMAX film for this movie. There's only 20 theaters in the entire country where you can see the full 75 millimeter thing, and it weighs in at like some ridiculous amount. Actually, I have that stat here. Let me pull that up. Yeah. Oppenheimer's IMAX reel is reportedly over 11 miles long and weighs 600 pounds. Whoa.
Yeah.
Therefore, there are only 20 theaters in the entire country who are going to be showing this in 70 millimeter. Guess what?
Wow.
One of them is King of Prussia.
Wow.
I'm definitely going to hit that up.
Yeah.
Whether I do that opening night or whether I do that later, I am definitely going to King of Prussia to see the 70 millimeter version of that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's definitely worth doing with the exclusivity behind it.
for sure.
Because
For
a lot
sure.
of and we've talked about this before on the podcast, but it was a long time ago, so there might be people listening or watching who have not seen this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of modern IMAX theaters are not actually IMAX theaters. They're um, not full format IMAX theaters like you would think of if like you went to a science center or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, where it's actually an IMAX screen.
A lot of
Um,
them are called large format theaters. It'll
yes.
say something like IMAX and large format theaters. The large
Mhm.
format theaters are what they're talking about here. That they're
So
not
it's
quite.
certainly, big, certainly bigger, but it's not full IMAX. And
Yeah.
if you have a chance to see something in full IMAX, um, like I actually saw The Dark Knight when it came
Mm-hmm.
out, full IMAX at the Whitaker Center in Harrisburg.
Right.
And when they have the full actual frame IMAX shots where you're like following a helicopter or something, when you're in an actual IMAX theater, you feel like you're flying. Like it's a different experience than what you would generally get at the theater,
For sure.
chain IMAX. So if you have a chance to check one of those out, they're showing like a feature film, I would definitely recommend doing that.
Absolutely. And if you live in this area, King of Prussia is your best bet.
Yep.
All right. Now we'll move on to our discussion for the evening, and came across a list of the 15 highest grossing films of all time. And so I thought we just kind of go through the list and talk about themes we see, um, things that surprise us, things that were interesting, and how much relevance does being on this list actually mean? What does this actually mean? So we'll start at the bottom and we'll work our way up to number one. So number 15 on the all-time box office list is Black Panther. And this one clocked in worldwide at 1.34 billion, 700 million domestic. And so Black Panther was number 15. Number 14, Avengers Age of Ultron, worldwide 1.4 billion, domestic 459 million. And that's really interesting because you see two movies this movie actually made more money, but made significantly less domestically. Interesting. Frozen.
The other thing,
Oh,
yeah, the other thing that's interesting about this movie is, at the bottom of the synopsis here, is that this movie came out the same weekend as Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao's boxing match, which have been looked forward to a long time, and a lot of industry analysts think that took some of the money from this movie when it came out, which is very interesting.
Man, that fight feels like it was forever ago.
Yeah, it was a while
Wow.
ago. Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. All right. Number 13 was Frozen 2. Worldwide 1.45 billion, domestically 4.77. Number 12, Top Gun Maverick, worldwide 1.49 billion, domestically 718 million. Number 11, Furious 7 of the Fast and Furious series, 1.51 billion, domestically 3.53. That's kind of fascinating. These movies have continued to do well internationally, in some ways better than they have domestically. Number 10, Avengers, the first one of the Avengers movies, and this one did $1.52 billion. Domestically, it did $623 million. Number 9, The Lion King, not the 1994 Lion King, the other Lion King, which I can't remember what year this came out, but it's not listed on here. But yeah, 1.66 billion, including 543 domestic. This is the one that surprised me. I did not realize that this one was on the list, or that it made 500 million domestically.
Yeah, I did. I guess I just blocked this from my memory because I never actually went and saw it. But I thought it didn't do too well, but apparently I was wrong. And it makes a lot of sense why they keep making live action Disney movies if this movie made $1.66 billion, over $1 billion worldwide.
Yeah.
That's gonna make them want to keep making them for sure, I guess.
Yeah, I am firmly in the grasp of these are really honestly are money grabs, but it is what it is.
I mean, if your remake is gonna make almost twice as much as the animated classic version, then it doesn't make any sense to not make it, I guess, if you're
Yeah.
in charge of the studio.
Yeah. Do you realize that movie had a $260 million budget?
Wow.
It's a crazy high budget. Number 8, Jurassic World. That was the first one of the second trilogy. Worldwide 1.67 billion, domestically $653 billion. Number 7, Spider-Man No Way Home. That was be the second one starring Tom Holland. And worldwide $1.92 billion, domestically $814 million.
Yeah, and I would say this and Top Gun Maverick are probably the two biggest movies that we've seen come out, not just financially, but cultural impact wise, since movie theaters first shut down in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. They're absolutely.
Both, I think both of these movies, Spider-Man and Top Gun, brought audiences back out. Probably a lot of people in both cases who had not been to a movie since movie theaters started closing down. And they both helped in a lot of ways, I think, resurrect the movie theater industry. And I don't think that we're not to it yet, but I don't think Avatar would have had as much success, the new one, if not for those two movies.
Yeah.
Preceding it. So yeah, I think they're to be recognized, and this goes back to the question about Spider-Man being the most bankable superhero. This movie actually has 3 different Spider-Men in it. And there were rumors about that for like 2 or 3 years that it was being filmed. To the point where Andrew Garfield was like, no, I'm not in it. Stop asking. And
that was just to his friends.
And then he ended up being in it. Also, and this is kind of a spoiler alert, but not really. Andrew Garfield is also in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
Yep.
So you want to see how that happened because that was interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely I guess maybe it's down to the fact that Spider-Man has been the most successful probably movie at explaining and exploring a multiverse concept
Mm-hmm.
that opened it up to have all these different variations on that character. And I think they've all been successful just because of the talent behind them
Yeah,
and the fact that they've really just been well made movies.
for sure.
And that has certainly not been the case for all superheroes. I'm looking at you, the Hulk. Um, but yeah, there's definitely something about that character that people have connected to, and this was a huge movie in that vein.
Yeah. Number 6, Avengers Infinity War. Worldwide 2.5 billion, 2.05 billion, domestically $678 million. Number 5, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. That is the first one of the newest trilogy. And this one did 2.07 billion, domestically $936 million.
Yeah, and
So,
I remember the when this one came out, I saw this opening night at Penn Cinema, and I remember having to park down the street at the restaurant near the theater and walk to the theater because every parking spot in the theater was taken, and it was in I think it was in a solid 10 or 12 theaters, and they were all sold out.
yeah. I definitely waited for over 3 hours prior to this movie in the theater, uh, in line, waiting to get into the IMAX version of this. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
um, it was quite the event for sure. Number 4, Titanic, worldwide 2.26 billion, domestically 674 million. Now, slight caveat on this, it has had several re-releases. It was re-released again in 2012 when it came back for a 3D re-release, and it was just reissued again recently. So it's had a little bit of a bump from getting re-releases a couple times. Number 3,
This is also where we start. This is also where we start the James Cameron domination of the top 5 at the box office.
Yeah, yep, that's where we're at. All right. Avatar: The Way of Water, worldwide 2.31 billion, domestically $683 million. And that one just came out this last year. The
And is
budget
now
on,
available on Plus if you have that.
yes. The budget on this one, now this is kind of funny. Estimated budget of 350 million to 460 million. That is a wide ranging budget.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not entirely sure what the deal is, but obviously James Cameron was quoted as saying this needed to be one of the, he said, third or fourth highest grossing film of all time just to turn a profit. So make of that what you will.
And I guess never James Cameron because I certainly had my doubts that it was gonna live up to that. I didn't see it necessarily getting over $2 billion, but it just kept on going and going. And we've talked about this. We reviewed this movie that it's you know it's a pretty good movie, but it's not like it doesn't blow your mind. It's really
No.
pretty looking. Like it's as Ryan described it when we reviewed it. It's a lot of ways like a nature documentary of Pandora,
Yeah.
which is really cool. But I don't see how that makes it $2 billion.
I know. I know. Uh, the number 2 movie of all time, Avengers Endgame, worldwide 2.79 billion, domestically $858 million. And number 1, Avatar, still Avatar, 2.92 billion, domestically 785 million. That's the list. So what do you make of what themes stand out to you first off?
Well, the first theme really is that a lot of these are pretty modern movies.
Yeah.
And, a lot of that is down to the fact that we're, spending more money to go to the movies overall. There's
Mhm.
more large format options, 3D, IMAX, 40X, those kind of things. People are spending more money on, which increases the amount of money that the movies are pulling in.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure what comes out that's going to beat Avatar. Because even Avengers, which I thought might have a chance in the grand scheme of things, 2.92 billion versus 2. Was it 79?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2.79 billion versus 2.9 billion is still a really significant amount of money. That's a
Mhm.
lot of money
Yeah.
um, to be separated by. So I really don't know what comes along that unseats that, if anything ever does.
Mhm.
Because in a lot of ways, the that was a high point of people going in out to the movies. It was the height of the 3D technology. A lot of people went out to see it because of that, because of the uniqueness of it and the intrigue around it. And I'm not sure if we're going to get back to that point of people going to the
Mhm.
movies in that amount, to overtake that.
Yeah. Yeah. The other main thing that sticks out to me is they're all almost all franchise movies. Um, they're movies with multiple franchises where they've been able to build momentum along the movies to go. Like you see Frozen 2, there was obviously the original Frozen that captured everybody and was so potential. A significant amount of the top 15 are Marvel movies, which obviously has shown to be just the box office domination that was Marvel up until Phase 4. Um, Interestingly enough, like even Top Gun Maverick, a second one based off a very successful movie. Uh, the only one that doesn't fit the bill, interestingly enough, Titanic. Titanic is the only one that's not connected to a franchise in any way, shape, or form. Now you could say Avatar too, because Avatar was the first movie, but now there's two of them. So you can kind of make a case for Avatar if you want, because it was the first of its kind. So basically, James Cameron is the only one who's been able to create uh, top 15 blockbuster movies without the franchise label.
Yeah, and I'll not, I don't think I'll ever really understand how Titanic made as much money as it did.
I don't understand it. I don't understand how Avatar. I mean, I understood a little bit of the original Avatar because, as we've talked about, like it was the peak of the fascination with the 3D, and everyone's, oh, you got to see this, and it was so unique and so different in 3D that everyone just kept wanting to see it. And then there was, oh, well, I'll see it in 2D, I'll see it in 3D. So it had that rolling for it. I will be honest, I am disappointed that Avatar Way of Water is on this series. I was hoping that this movie would not continue making money because I just don't think it's that good. I just don't. Like, I don't think it's a movie that should be on this list. I mean, what Marvel built with the MCU was unbelievably unique. And I think in that way, these movies deserve to be up there from that standpoint of creating. I mean, who in their right mind would think of creating a franchise that has 20 some movies in it that all connect together? I mean, that's just like that is ambitious beyond all imagining. So I feel like in some ways they deserve to be on those lists because they created this audience and they did this crazy thing. Um, and then like Top Gun Maverick was just really really good connected to it. And then you have one that's kind of gimmicky. Like I mean, gimmicky might not be the right word, but Fast Furious 7 it cracks this list because this was kind of the send off for Paul Walker. This was the
Mhm.
movie that came out after Paul Walker died, And so there was like, oh, what are they going to do? How are they going to do this? How are they going to honor Paul Walker? I mean, a lot of these movies have done really well, but this one took the cake. And I think that was what put it over the edge. Anything else stick out to you?
No, just I mean, you touched on this, but in a lot of ways, the movies that ended up on this list are not the best movies from the series that
Yeah.
they're representing. But that's just, I guess, how it works with the cumulative effect of building an audience.
Yeah. And I think too, like, the role of the global and worldwide audience has just vastly increased. And I think that's one of the other things about these lists being modern is this is a relatively new phenomenon, and that movies and studios counting on a vast international audience as part of their box office debut, as opposed to kind of like icing on the cake, as it were. Like they are counting on international audiences for a lot of these films. And it's interesting to see which ones are on this list because of the worldwide audience, and which ones are on this list because of the domestic audience. Like Black Panther. Black Panther is 15th on the list. And I think it was like fourth or fifth, or maybe fourth, fifth, or sixth on this list domestically, because it did 700 million domestically. And I think just this kind of this movie appealed significantly more to the American audience than it did to the worldwide audience. Whereas, like, if you look at, if we pull up, like Titanic, 2.26 billion, only 674 million of that is domestic. So there's a movie that made, $60 million, or no, $30 million less than Black Panther did domestically, but is significantly higher on the list because of the international audience. And the same thing with Way of Water, 683 million domestic, but 2.31 billion. So it's significantly better internationally than it did in the US. So yeah, interesting to list. I have no idea what movie is going to pop up on this list next, because I'm not seeing the Marvel movies going to be on there anytime soon. I'm not seeing the Star Wars movies going to be on there anytime soon. It will be interesting to see what cracks this list next,
Yeah, for sure.
for sure. All right, so we'll close out today with our watch list, movies we've watched over the last week. Rob, what'd you watch?
So since we recorded the last podcast, I have watched 7 movies. So I've actually made up for several weeks when I haven't had time to watch any, and decided to just watch them all this week. And it's been a wide variety. So I'll run down the list, and I'll highlight, just to give you a picture of what kind of things Rob watches. Because Rob has children. Rob also likes scary things. Rob likes to go to the movie theater.
Yeah.
So it's a very eclectic list here. I watched Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, which we're going to talk about coming up in the following weeks. I watched The Boogeyman in the theater. I watched Vivo, an animated movie with my kids on Netflix. I watched Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, which is on Paramount Plus. I watched Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse twice. I went and watched it once by myself after work, and then the next day watched it with my son. I watched the Disney original movie Zombies 3 last night because that's what was chosen for family movie night by my son. And then I watched the movie Terrifier last night, which could not be more different from Zombies 3 in the way that it is a very hard R horror creepy clown movie. So I've seen quite a lot over the last
You
week.
have.
I would say that I was happy to finally get around to watching Dungeons and Dragons. I know that Ryan had seen it and had generally positive feedback on it, and I agree. I think it was funny. I did look at the numbers for it, ended up not doing very well in the box office compared to what they were hoping it might do.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate because I did think it was a movie that would be worth revisiting those characters. I thought Chris Pine did a really good job as the lead character in this movie. Yeah, I thought it was
Mhm.
funny. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was different. There were certainly some elements in there that were geared towards people who have had experience with the game or know some things about the game, but I didn't think it was overwhelming to the point where if you had never played the game, you wouldn't be able to follow it. I still thought it was followable,
Yeah.
even if you played the game. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I loved.
Hmm.
I went and saw it twice. And what's interesting, the second time I saw it, um, you know, and Ryan has talked about this. He likes to see movies more than once, and a lot of that is that um, when you watch it the second time, since you know what's going to happen in the story, it frees you up a little bit more to analyze some of the things about it, some of the themes about it, some things like that. Um, and I left watching it the second time thinking this is not really a kids movie. Like, it's certainly an animated movie, and it's certainly geared in a lot of ways towards kids. But this was a pretty deep movie thematically.
Yeah.
It, and it was pretty dense story wise. Like, this was not a simple story.
No.
So I left watching the second time thinking, I could see a lot of kids maybe even getting bored by this, or not staying engaged with it the whole time. But I liked that they did it that way because in a lot of ways it's not talking down to the audience or um, simplifying it for the audience. It's letting them experience this story,
Hmm.
which um, spoiler alert, I guess. If you're planning on going to see this, you haven't seen it yet. Spoiler alert. Um, at the end of the credits, they show there's going to be a third movie, which I don't think we knew going into it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's very interesting. It stops like right in the middle of like it stops right before they go to fight the bad guys. And you're like, oh, that makes sense. I was wondering how they're going to resolve this, but
Yeah.
now it makes sense because there's going to be a whole other movie to resolve it.
Yeah. You're getting on
Uh,
to
uh,
a time frame in this movie. And you're like, are they gonna wrap this up or not?
yeah,
Yeah.
I will say my favorite little multiverse uh, Easter egg in here. They had a whole lot of different things. So my favorite thing was when his nemesis, the Spot character, popped his head into Venom's universe and talked
Yes.
to the old lady who was the shopkeeper.
Yes.
And he's like, "You act like you've seen crazy stuff like this all the time." And she just kind of rolls her eyes at him like, "Buddy, you have no idea."
Yeah, I enjoyed that too. There's a bunch of good little moments in there like that.
And that was funny. That was good because it's funny even if you have no idea what that lady was supposed to be.
Hmm.
But if you have actually seen movies and know who she is, it was even funnier.
It was, yeah, for sure. I keep waiting for the actual tie-in between like the Spider-Man universe and the Venom, and it just keeps not happening. Like they keep
Yeah.
hinting at it, they keep like doing these little tie-ins, and then it just doesn't happen. So I wonder if they are finally going to get something like that in the works, but we'll see. I also watched Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I will say that this is a movie where I feel like in order to give my full opinion on it, I do feel like I need to see it again. Because my opinion of it changed as I went along to the movie. I will say I didn't love the early parts of this movie. I wasn't enjoying it that much. I didn't love the early parts of this movie, but I came along as the story developed and we got more depth and we got more integrated characters and it grew on me as we got further into the movie. But I was still left with some of those first impressions of like, I don't love this. I will say my one, and I'll have to see if it's justified. My one critique was one of the things I thought stood out most about Into the Spider Verse was the degree to which they took the time to add all the little comic book elements to it. The wham, like all those specific little like written word language, or like all those just little features to let you know like this is a comic book movie, and we're leaning in hardcore into the comic book side of it. um, I definitely feel like they did not do that nearly as much. Not that they didn't do it, but they didn't do it nearly as much. And I didn't like that as much. I felt like that hurt the overall visual appeal. Not that it's not extremely well done, because it is. Um, and I think they did do, I mean, they did do a pretty good job. Like each kind of own universe has its own like graphic style, um, which is interesting and visually spectacular. Um, it does give the movie a little bit of a choppy feel at times because of that. Um, but I don't think that's a huge detractor. I still very much enjoy the characters. I thought the movie did bring a significant amount of depth to it, and I'm intrigued as to where they go. They go with it from here.
Yeah, I think we need to see animated Venom voiced by Tom Hardy.
yeah,
So that would be pretty awesome.
yeah. So maybe we'll revisit this when we have a little bit more time later. So we'll come back to it perhaps. But that is the show. Thank you everyone for tuning into Film for Fans. Uh, Make sure you go to the website where we have our Mission Impossible series stuff up. We've on the website right now is Mission Impossible 1 and Mission Impossible 2, possibly getting up Mission Impossible 3 this week. Make sure you check out the podcast and tell your friends about it, and go to our YouTube channel, all that good stuff. Until next time, enjoy the movies.